Joining us from Sydney is leading criminal lawyer John Sutton, and we're going to discuss some of the happenings that occurred in the United States over the past week. John, welcome to The Informer. What have you made of the happenings and some of the sad scenes that have emanated from the United States, the not-so-United States?
Thank you, George. Well, obviously, it goes without saying it's an absolute travesty, but there are parts of it which are entirely understandable, and there are parts of it which are not. And when we have any discussion, I think, about this topic, it's incumbent upon any sensible person to absolutely condemn looters and criminals who are out there to try to justify such criminal acts on the basis of the travesty that occurred that resulted in the death of George Floyd. But I think for my part, that the thing that really underlines the dire situation in the US is the absolute underbelly that's created by having no social infrastructure, or almost no social infrastructure. One only has to get on a train and ride through parts of the eastern seaboard to see the absolute devastating poverty that exists over there. And whilst it is the fact that the poor are so damn poor, and even the slightly haves, as opposed to the haves and the have-nots, have got so much more than the underbelly have ever going to be able to aspire to, until someone realises there needs to be a social more there, a social scene that provides a safety net for people. And of course, then we have the ridiculous situation of how they deem the necessity to deal with any crime is to punish it to the fullest extent and to lock people up for huge amounts of time. So on the one hand, they've got nothing to live for in their lives, and so they're going to cause criminal acts. And on the other side, there's no support. And if they do get caught committing a criminal act, they're locked up for years and years and years. So the scenes are regrettably hardly surprising.
John, the thing that has added another layer of sadness is the actions of the police force, and then the immediate response by those authorities to their officers. They were coming out and trying to explain yet again that it wasn't what you thought had happened. It was something other than that. And of course, this morning we're hearing that no, they've decided to go back and upgrade those charges against the police officer and his assistants. What did you make of that?
George, you know, but people listening to this might not know, but I used to be a police officer. Let me say there is no justification for the way they acted. But I really believe, when I say this, that at the core of the American determination of how they resolve a problem, it so often comes out of fear and almost xenophobic reaction with the death of George Floyd, because you had 4 police officers, large lumps of human beings, excessively, manifestly so, kneeling and holding him to the ground when he was, I would venture to guess, already handcuffed.
Yeah, I mean, what
was he going to do? Was he going to be the Black Knight? Was going to be the Black Knight out of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and they're going to nibble away at their ankles? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And to use that amount of force on someone who has no capacity at all to respond, other than to use words, which they promptly ignored, you know, it's massive excess. And that is the underbelly of the American way of dealing with problems. There's little, in what I see anyway. Think back to the films you will have seen, and I don't mean movies, I mean film of footage with Vietnamese soldiers, American soldiers in Vietnam, holding M16s above walls. They can't see where they're shooting, but they're still shooting. Why? Because it's an excessive reaction. And that manifests throughout law enforcement.
You rightly point out examples of quite behaviour that's not acceptable. But shouldn't the Americans have learned their lesson with the Rodney King happenings in the late 90s?
Then and many times since. I mean, I saw one news report the other day that said that a woman was run over in Chicago by a police car in the midst of these protests. It's just ridiculous. Yes, they should have learnt their lesson. When I say we, the the Australian police forces are prevented, as I understand it, from using chokeholds for the very reason that people die from them. But American law enforcement agencies are refusing to outlaw chokeholds. And effectively, that's what killed George Floyd. They knelt on his neck and they cut off the carotid artery, as I understand it, and I could be wrong on this, but effectively, he was asphyxiated and blood was prevented from flowing around his body. It beggars belief. It is absolute madness that they can allow such tactics to be used.
And what did you make of the upgrading of charges this morning?
Well, it seems to me to be justifiable. I think, thinking as a defence lawyer now, if I was the fellow who was down at the feet, I would feel mortified that I was part of that charging circuit, because if you're down at the feet, you're holding onto the feet, then you're not going to be conscious of what is going on up at the head end because you're focused down there. The concept that he could know, even in such close proximity with what was going on with Chauvin at the head, is an issue that needs to be carefully thought about. And I think the same probably goes for the second one coming up from the feet. But the guy next to Chauvin has got to have known where Chauvin's knee was and the fact it was on his neck, and will probably have heard what was going on. Just in relation to that, when that sort of situation is occurring, you're also trying to focus on what's going on around you. So whether or not they were able, all of them, I should say, able to hear what was going on with him saying, I can't breathe, I don't know, because the adrenaline will be flowing through those police, but certainly Chauvin, and I would have thought the fellow next to him.
What lessons, if any, are there for us in Australia and the way our police treat our Indigenous Australians? We've had way too many deaths in custody over the last 20, 30 years. Is there a lesson for us?
There's always lessons to be learned, but George, I think we have to be very careful not to conflate two issues. Deaths in custody, whilst there have been examples of prison officers and police officers being party to occurrences that have resulted in a death. I remember there was an expose just recently on an Indigenous person who was dealt with in custody and given an injection and put to sleep, as in chemically, who eventually asphyxiated, I believe, because of the chemicals. But we all have to look and learn and listen and see what's going on. But deaths in custody is a different kettle of fish, because very often it's people committing suicide in custody, and we can't conflate those issues. I mean, if we want to go near a delicate subject of something that occurred in Sydney just the other day, where an officer being referred to as a junior officer took the legs out from underneath an Aboriginal boy and put him face first into the ground. Even as a defence lawyer, I'd have to say, you really need to see the whole of the video. The fact that he was put to the ground, we know that the 17 or 18-year-old, whatever he was, swore at the police officer, as I understand it, offered to break his jaw. The police officer was presented with a situation where he was being threatened. There does have to be a demonstration of some level of force. Now, whether it was simply arresting him while he was standing, I don't know if there was any kind of resistance that resulted in him taking the kid's legs away from underneath him. I don't know. But I can understand the arrest on what I've seen thus far. It might be that the manner of that arrest was a little bit over the top. But, he was there on the street at the time. There were more than just that one police officer and that one Aboriginal boy, from what I've seen. I don't defend entirely what the police officer did, but at the same token, I can't bring myself to completely condemn it.
John Sutton, thank you very much for helping us out and giving us a sense of how you saw things that occurred in the United States during a very, very difficult week. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.